All right, so we're finally tackling this one, huh? The Beverly Priest case.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming.
And with these sources, I mean, the original police files
Hmm.
and a local journalist's personal archive. It's kind of crazy we have access to this stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, you don't usually get this kind of dual perspective, you
Yes.
know?
Me too.
So it's like we have the official story, the investigation, and then all of these notes and side investigations that this journalist was doing kind of a shadow
Yeah,
investigation.
shadow investigation. I like that.
So we can really see what the police were focusing on and then compare that to what this journalist was digging into.
Right, and maybe find the missing pieces or see where the police went wrong.
Exactly.
So for those listening, if you don't know the basics, picture this. 1975,
Yeah.
Illaroo Campground, beautiful Australian coast, Beverly Priest, just 12 years old, vanishes.
It's a classic missing persons case, but when you start digging into the details,
Which is what we're here for, right?
Huh.
The deep dive.
yeah, that's right, the deep dive. And what we find is that this case is anything but typical, especially when you look at those early police interviews.
Hundreds of them, right? What'd they find?
Well, a community on edge for sure, but there's this underlying distrust of the police investigation itself that keeps popping up in the journalist's notes.
Distrust, huh? That's never a good sign.
No, it isn't. And that distrust seems to revolve around this one guy, Bill Waits.
Waits, the local police officer, the one who was so involved with like youth sports and stuff.
They're the very same. Now, he's mentioned in the police files, obviously, but the journalist's archive is full of notes about him, his behavior, and the rumors swirling around him.
Like what kind of rumors?
Oh, whispers about inappropriate behavior with young girls, that kind of thing.
Wow, okay, that's heavy stuff.
It is. And what's interesting is that there's no real evidence to support any of these rumors, at least not in the police files. But this journalist, he seemed convinced that Waits was somehow involved in Beverly's disappearance.
So it's like he had this gut feeling about Waits, like a hunch.
Yeah, an itchy nose, he called it.
An itchy nose. Okay, I've got to remember that one.
Write that down. But it's fascinating. You've got the official investigation and then this parallel one being run by the journalist based on gut feelings and whispers.
It's almost like he was conducting his own personal investigation.
Precisely. And that personal investigation leads him to this fascinating detail that's completely absent from the police files. A list.
A list of what?
A list of 7 journalism students who were in Grafton, the nearby town, at the time of Beverly's disappearance.
Okay, 7 journalism students. Why would he focus on them?
That's the million-dollar question. His notes aren't totally clear on his reasoning, but we can kind of piece it together.
All right, let's play detective. What do we have?
Well, for one, several of these students were known to be involved in that same youth sports scene that Waits was running.
Ah, okay, so potential connection to Waits.
Exactly. And remember, this journalist was good at picking up on things, on those off-the-record conversations, those hints of a cover-up.
Like he had his ear to the ground picking up the vibes.
Exactly. And it seems like he was sensing that someone, maybe one of these students, knew more than they were letting on.
Interesting. So potentially one of these students saw something or heard something that could blow the case wide open.
That's what he seemed to believe.
Okay, but did the police ever even look into this list? 7 potential witnesses just sitting there.
They tried, or at least that's what the police files say.
Boy, there's got to be a but.
But the trail went cold on a few of them.
Of course it did.
Years later, when Beverly's remains are finally found after a bushfire, the investigation gets going again.
Right, that was big news back then.
And guess what? The list pops up again. But now 3 of the students are dead, and another one, a guy named Alf Thomas, is completely missing.
Missing, huh? That's convenient.
Isn't it? So now we've got a missing girl, a suspicious police officer, and a list of potential witnesses. Some dead, some missing. It's a mess.
A tangled web, for sure. But before we get too deep into these students, there's one more thing from these early investigations that really gets me.
You're talking about Tracy Hegarty.
Tracy Hegarty, exactly. Another young girl disappeared from the same area just 2 years before Beverly.
And the police barely even mention her case in their files.
Which is crazy, right? But the journalist, he kept detailed notes about her, about the similarities between the 2 disappearances.
It's almost like he was seeing a pattern that the police were ignoring.
Or maybe trying to ignore.
Maybe.
Huh.
And that pattern leads us to another fascinating character, Maury Galligan.
Galligan, who's that?
A former Queensland police officer. But by this point, he's basically gone off the grid, living out in the bush.
Off the grid, huh? Sounds suspicious.
He wasn't officially a suspect in either case, but the journalists seemed to think he fit a certain profile.
What do you mean?
Someone with knowledge of police procedures, someone who could move around undetected, someone who knew the area.
The Outback is a big place to disappear in.
It is, and it makes you wonder, why is Galligan's name only in the journalists' files? Why didn't the police even consider him?
Good question. Maybe the journalist was onto something that the police completely missed.
It's definitely possible, and it raises a really disturbing thought.
What's that?
What if these disappearances, Tracy and Beverly, weren't random? What if there was something more organized, more sinister going on?
Oh, wow, that's a whole other level of creepy.
It is, and it's a question we need to keep in mind as we move forward with this deep dive. But for now, let's go back to that list of journalism students, especially one name in particular.
Let me guess. Justin Joey Goodreich.
You got it. But to understand his role, we got to shift gears. We're moving from 1975 and those initial investigations to something that happened decades later. A twist that seemingly solved the case, but ultimately left everyone with even more questions.
Oh, man, this is getting good. You ready to dive into part 2?
Born ready, let's do it. So we left off with that cliffhanger, right? Justin Joey Goodreich, one of the journalism students on the list, confessing to Beverly's murder.
Yeah, a confession. You'd think that'd be a case closed.
You would, but looking at everything, it seems like even the police weren't totally convinced. Like something just didn't sit right.
Really? What makes you say that?
Well, for one, Goodrich claimed he met Beverly at the local athletic fields and that she agreed to meet him on the beach that day, the day she disappeared.
Okay.
But the journalist's notes, they contradict that. He documented how Beverly's friends specifically said she was super wary of older boys at those fields. She wouldn't have just gone off alone with one.
So we've got Goodreich's confession and then what, like eyewitness accounts that don't line up?
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, was Goodrich telling the whole truth, or was he covering for someone?
Ooh, covering for someone. Okay, now we're talking conspiracy theories.
Well, maybe not a full-blown conspiracy, but it definitely raises some red flags. And this is where the journalist's obsession with Bill Waits comes back into the picture.
Waits, a police officer. What's he got to do with this?
Remember, he ran those youth sports programs, so he was always at those athletic fields. Goodrich's confession basically puts all the blame on himself and leaves Waits completely out of it.
I'm starting to see where you're going with this. Are you saying the journalist thought Goodreich might have been covering for Waits?
It's a possibility he definitely considered. And remember all those rumors about Waits and young girls?
Yeah, the itchy nose feeling.
Exactly. It's almost like Goodreich's confession was a way to protect Waits, to keep those rumors from being fully investigated.
Okay, I'm with you so far. But why would Goodreich do that? What's the connection between them?
That's the million-dollar question. And it gets even more complicated when you look at how Goodreich's story keeps changing.
How so?
He initially claimed he took Beverly to a spot north of Illaroo Campground, but later information shows he was actually living off the grid near Woolley.
Woolley, that's miles south of Illaroo. Why lie about his location? Unless he had something to hide.
Exactly. And get this, Maury Galligan, remember him, the ex-cop living off the grid. He actually backed up Goodreich's initial story, even though it was a lie.
Hold on, so we've got Goodreich changing his story, Galligan lying for him, and Waits potentially involved somehow. It's like a weird, messed up puzzle.
It really is, and that's not even the craziest part. There's a note in the journalist's archive, and it's super cryptic. He talks about a confluence of silence, hinting that there were others who knew more but were staying quiet. Out of fear, maybe, or to protect themselves.
Confluence of silence. That's kind of poetic, but also super creepy. Who else could have known? What about those other journalism students? Did any of them come forward?
Remember, 3 of them were already dead by the time the investigation really picked up again. The police managed to find and interview 2 of the remaining students, but their memories were hazy.
So no help there. That leaves us with what? Just Alf Thomas? The one who disappeared. What if he was the key to all of this?
That's what the journalists seem to think. And this is where his personal connections, his being so embedded in the community, really paid off.
Okay, I'm hooked.
Yeah.
What did he find out? All right, so last we heard the journalist was about to uncover something big about Alf Thomas, the missing journalism student. What did he find out?
Okay, are you ready for this? Because the journalist's notes, they say that Alf Thomas wasn't actually Alf Thomas.
Wait, what?
Yeah, it's wild, right? Turns out he was actually this guy named Dan Pinta.
Dan Pinta, okay, and who's that?
He was the younger brother of one of the journalist's closest friends.
Hold on, so this missing student, a potential witness, was living a double life. This is getting crazy.
Right. Apparently, Dan was struggling with his sexuality back then and was afraid of how people would react. So he skipped town, changed his name, and basically started a whole new life.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack.
Yep.
So did the police ever find him, this Dan Pinta?
They did, actually, thanks to the
Oh,
journalist.
yeah, Mr. Connected over here.
Right. He had all those personal ties that the police just didn't. So he reached out to the Pinta family, and it took some convincing, but
Mm.
they finally confirmed that, yeah, Dan was alive and well, just living as Alf Thomas.
So the police tracked him down. What did he have to say after all these years?
Well, his statement to the police is really interesting. He basically says he left Grafton because of all the scrutiny and the rumors flying around about Bill Waits.
Waits again. Man, that guy just can't catch a break.
Right. And you can kind of understand Dan's fear, right? He was already living a lie. The last thing he wanted was to be dragged into this huge investigation and maybe have his own secret exposed.
Yeah, I could see that. So he just wanted to stay under the radar. But did he actually know anything about Beverly's disappearance?
He denied any involvement, said he was at Illaroo Campground the weekend, Beverly vanished, but that's it.
But he left town right. Seems a little suspicious.
It does, and the journalist's notes, they kind of reflect that uncertainty. On the one hand, he seems to believe Dan's story, about being scared and wanting to stay hidden. But he also documented a conversation with Dan's sister, and she mentioned that Dan was always really troubled by the priest case, carried a lot of guilt about it.
Guilt. That's a strong word. If he wasn't involved, why would he feel guilty?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Was it just survivor's guilt? He got away and Beverly didn't? Or was there something more? The police never found anything concrete to link Dan to the case, and he always maintained his innocence until he died a few years back.
So even with Goodright's confession and finding Dan Pinta, we still don't really know what happened to Beverly Priest. It's frustrating.
It is, and I think that's what makes this whole deep dive so compelling. We have these two sources, the police files and the journalist's archive, but the truth is still out there somewhere.
Like, we have all the pieces of the puzzle, but we can't quite put them together.
Exactly. We see the official narrative and then all these side investigations, the whispers, the doubts. It makes you realize that sometimes, even with all the information in the world, some mysteries just stay unsolved.
It makes you think about the limits of what we can know. Even with all the evidence and interviews, there's still this human element that we might never fully grasp.
And in this case, that human element is Bill Waits. His name just keeps popping up throughout both sources. That itchy nose feeling never really goes away.
It's like a ghost that haunts the entire investigation.
Exactly. So we're left with these lingering questions, these doubts, and the unsettling feeling that the full truth might be buried somewhere beneath layers of time and silence. It's a reminder that sometimes the most important clues aren't the ones you can see or touch, but the ones you feel, the ones that linger in the air long after the case has gone cold.
And that's what makes these deep dives so fascinating. It's not just about solving a crime. It's about exploring the complexities of human nature, the things that drive us, the choices we make, and the secrets we keep. So for those of you listening, we hope this deep dive into the Beverly Priest case has given you something to think about, maybe even sparked your own theories and questions. What do you think really happened?